Hey all, Game Methuselah here. I just want to do a little video here on some of my favorite monsters and how to run them as an encounter. A couple people asked about this after I said how I run my encounters, and I thought, what the heck, I'll throw one together. I'm trying to do this with my Patreon as well so that I can make it a little more interesting than just putting it down on paper and then letting them look at it and trying to figure out how things go. So if I can actually show you how I run the encounters, maybe it'll work out better. But I'll give it a try. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, please let me know. Now, two of my favorite monsters are in this counter. One, the Mimic. If you saw Matt Colville's subreddit on it, he hates my Mimic. I've done some interesting things with Mimics. I find them really fun, really an archetypal D&D monster, and they're really enjoyable and easy to play. They're also good because they're low to middle level, and they're great little introduction for lower level characters to run. They add all kinds of interesting calamities into the fight. If you read Matt's subreddit, you'll see what I mean. The second one I'm using is the Gargoyle. I love the Gargoyle. Now, I sort of house rule it a little bit and use some of the abilities from sort of the 4th edition for when they're in stone form. That way the guys who like to metagame and be rules lawyers don't just walk in and shoot every statue you have in your dungeon, assuming they know it's a gargoyle. So you'll see that I've added that in. It makes it really kind of a better deal, and then you throw lots of statues into your party, and it drives your players crazy. So I will go ahead and reverse the camera and sort of run through the little encounter for you. Hopefully it'll be good, and I'll come back at the end to do a final yak up with it. So here we go. Okay, well, this little encounter is going to have two of my favorite creatures. First and foremost, the Gargoyles. CR2, 450 points. I have a house rule I use here, and I kind of stole it from 4th edition, something I really liked. It's an item that basically in 4th edition was called Stone Form. And what it did in that, I think, is it gave them damage resistant 25, regeneration 3, and tremor sets. Now, I thought that was a little much for 5th edition, so I made it armor class plus 10. I gave them the tremor sense at 10 squares again, and they have damage resistance on everything. Now, when they get out of stone form, they revert to the standard form listed above, which gives them damage resistance for blunt, piercing, and slashing weapons, except that ones that are magical or adamantite. The usual immune to poison and things like that exist. I like this a lot. That way people tend not to metagame and just shoot at every statue they see, thinking, of course, well, it's a gargoyle. The second is also one of my absolute favorite monsters, the Mimic. The Mimic is, I think, really epic Dungeons & Dragons. They've kept their strength in 5th edition. They're still pretty interesting. They do a reasonably good amount of damage for the CR, but their armor class is very low. Lots of hit points, but that low armor class is going to really haunt them. They're going to be hit by pretty much everything, and their life expectancy alone is not really good. Now, my assumption here is that we're going to have a party. And the party is going to be, let's say, 3rd levelers. We're going to have like a little dwarven warrior, a halfling rogue, human paladin, a little human cleric, and a half-elven wizard. Now, they're coming down into this underground, someplace where it would be dusty and dreary, and looks like it's been sealed off. It immediately becomes an interesting appearance because it looks like a lair of some wizard. You have a table with chairs and a summoning circle, and there's chests with gold, and even a bed and some supplies. So this looks like a place that someone might have stayed. You could lay it on thick, saying basically, well, there's layers of dust. It doesn't look like anybody's been here in quite a long period of time. You note no tracks. You can embellish however you want. Now, again, if they see the gargoyle statues, likely everyone's going to be nervous. I tend to put these out in my dungeon all the time, just as statues. The real reason is that it makes people constantly nervous. It's something you would kind of expect in a design of any sort of macabre, medieval style labyrinth where they would put these statues. Often for gargoyles, I have lots of human statues that look like they've been turned to stone by Medusas, and that's kind of what I normally use them for. But in this case, I'm actually using statues that look like gargoyles. So there we go. The party sort of would come down the stairs, do the thing. They come into this point. This is where you look at it. At third level, you have approximately 1,125 to 2,000 points to deal with a hard encounter. The party sees the treasure. They would move up for it, likely send up the rogue to check out the chest. The wizard wants to see the book. Cleric and paladin don't think this is a great idea. The cleric just stays there to kind of watch over it. At that point, once the halfling gets into range, the mimic attacks. Now, you have 3 creatures in this CR range that can pretty much fight. If it's a small party and they're not particularly strong, you don't want to necessarily match them up too terribly. So at this point, what I would do is I would animate 2 of the gargoyles. The gargoyle here and the gargoyle here would be the 2. He disengages. This gargoyle then would prepare to attack. And this one there would also prepare to attack instead of being a statue. Very common attack. Now, the battle ensues. These characters are not dummies. They cast their spells. The fight ensues. The paladin comes up to protect. The normal situation occurs. But at some point, let's say one of these gargoyles dies. Maybe the mimic is all torn up and he dies. The tremor sense of the other 2 lets you repeat this encounter. So this mimic no longer looks like a bed. It's now a mimic. It immediately attacks. There's still one wounded gargoyle here, and he stays in the fight, but the other gargoyle comes down and attacks. So now you have a situation once again where you have one mimic and now 3 gargoyles, one nearly dead and 2 that are strong. Now this fight's going to ensue, but because you put 2 encounters essentially back to back, it makes it really highly dangerous for the party. These creatures are pretty tough. They can put up a pretty good fight. They don't do a ton of damage, so it's harder to wipe out a party. Now, again, if your party is weak, you can just run the 1 encounter and let them go. And they can then do the standard situation where they rest up and they heal up and do whatever. But when you back up 2 encounters like this, where you have 2 CR hard encounters back to back, it's a real challenge for even a good party. And that's sometimes what you want depending upon how dramatic you want the event. Now, I wasn't trying to fool anybody by using different things other than gargoyle statues and the like, so it's very likely that they would figure that something is fishy here. Anyway, assuming that they win, you have 2 treasure, hooked together, so you can usually upgrade the magic. I would tend to basically combine this into 1 treasure slot that was a level or 2 above what the monsters would normally have in lair. That makes it really appealing for high-level adventurers who are really hard and hardy, because you're going to be continuing to run tough adventures for them. So you want to have the treasure good. You want to make sure they get some nice treasure and the like. And if you run it like 1 or 2 levels above what the party is, the reward tends to justify the risk that they end up getting. And your players tend to be pretty happy with the outcome. Now, this is 2 of my favorite monsters. I like to run them in combination. I think both of these monsters seem to be having like a torpor type ability, so it would be not uncommon to find them in a deserted section of your dungeon. Well, I'm hoping you're seeing how the combo works. The idea that I run 1 encounter after another encounter can be really very challenging to your players. But remember, what I like to do is really give it an opportunity and an excuse to give them better magical treasures and to give them better treasure all along. So you raise up the level of treasures they get in lair, and it's going to make your characters a lot tougher. And you're going to want that, especially if this is the way you tend to run your encounters. So give it some thought. So in this case where you had CR2 level creatures, you give them 2 or 3 steps higher than what the book actually recommends for those creatures in lair. Now, the other encounter I didn't show, which is the one I would actually kind of recommend, would be instead of 1 mimic and 2 gargoyles or 2 mimics and 1 gargoyle, you run 3 mimics. And then you have 3 gargoyles as the second encounter. Now, the gargoyles aren't really too concerned about the mimics. They're going to stand there and pretty much ignore the battle. After a while, the players are going to get lulled into the thinking, they're more than likely just statues while they're battling the mimics. It's not like they really have a whole lot of choice anyway. Mimics can put up a good fight. 3 of them are really nasty. And if they're starting to tear up the party, maybe you forget about the gargoyles as your second encounter and just let it pass with that. But
If they're getting through it fairly easily, maybe the gargoyles jump in a little sooner. So maybe they don't wait for all the mimics to die. They say, okay, hey, look, we don't want these mimics to die. We like using them as bait. So the gargoyles sort of animate early and they jump into the battle. Either way, it makes for a really exciting fight and a very interesting and sort of common dungeon crawl feel. It really is sort of old school Dungeons and Dragons. I enjoy them. I like these creatures. I think it's been a good way to do it, and I'm going to try this now with Patreon to see if I can make my encounters interesting for them. So until we have a chance to talk again, fight me devils fight, for I hate peace. Game on.